Joshua, balancing this whole ministry thing can be tough.
Let's see how we can get back on the right track.
Welcome back, everyone, to a brand new season of Bearing Up. I'm Zack Griffin, and co-hosting this season with me is Joshua Hester. How are you doing, man?
Doing great. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be tagging in for Logan. So it's good.
Yeah. So Logan, he is a new dad. He has now just had his wife just had their baby. 9 pounds and 14 ounces. No, just kidding. He was born on the 24th of January. 7 pounds, 8 ounces. Everybody's happy and healthy and doing good. Parker Keith is the baby's name. So if I get a video or something from Logan, this is where I'm going to put it. If there's no video, I'm just going to post a couple pictures here just so everybody can see. If you're actually watching it, if you're listening, we're glad to have you too. Just remember that this is also a video podcast as well. You can check us out on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and of course you can listen to it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts. So, with that out of the way, we are introducing this new season with Joshua. I'm glad you're here, man, and glad you are able to tag in with Logan being busy with his new baby. But we want to just begin by saying that Joshua and I, we have talked a little bit about bearing up, and we've talked about the goal of the podcast and the original intent behind it. And so before we get into our main topic today, I just kind of wanted to see your thoughts about that, Joshua, and sort of the reclaiming the roots. And you were there at the very beginning because you were our very first guest.
Yep.
The very second episode of the show. So what do you think about that, about the direction that we're kind of moving in for this season?
Well, I remember before the podcast when you had this idea of a podcast. And you were very excited about encouraging other ministers, bearing them up, building them up. And, they're not in ministry. You're very busy, with lessons and with ministry in general. And it really impressed me that you wanted to go above and beyond with this podcast, number one, especially with the purpose of encouraging other ministers. So that's what this is going to be about. This season is going to be more about going back to the roots of encouraging other ministers, which I'm really excited about, because we're at a stage where we're coming. I mean, you started this podcast 6 months before COVID. Is that right?
No, I think it was after COVID had started. I think it was the fall of the fall of 21. No, it was longer than that. I can't remember when we started, but it was post beginning of COVID.
Okay. Well,
I think it was the year that everything shut down. So.
Like 2020, when everything in the world, went down. Yeah. I just think about how we're not in that stage where we were. We're like a new coming out kind of stage.
Yeah, we're not post COVID. I'm almost post COVID myself, getting over COVID.
Yeah.
So, and it's been pretty rough on me, but yeah, I know what you mean. We are kind of we are getting to a stage where it's like, okay, so maybe it's not going anywhere, but we're gonna move on, and we're gonna continue, pick up where we left off this is a part of, life now, or, we're gonna do what the church is intended to do, and we're not gonna allow, other things to get in the way of that. And we're sort of trying to reclaim some things, perhaps. Is that kind of where you're going with
well, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I think that this podcast, this season of getting back to what it was, to the roots, it's almost perfect timing, I would say,
Yeah.
to where we are in life and where we are, as ministers. So I'm excited. I'm really excited.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. So, yeah. So we're trying to focus in on sort of reclaiming the art of ministry, and that's how we're going to title this podcast, this episode today, "Reclaiming the Art of Ministry." There's going to be lots of good episodes we're going to have. We're going to talk about why ministers quit. We're going to talk about a lot of things in regards to ministry. And don't think just because if you're listening to this and you're not a minister that there's not some application, because in a way you are a minister. Every one of us is. If we are Christians, we are ambassadors for Christ. We're ministers of reconciliation. That's what we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is something for everybody, not just if you are a vocational preacher or associate minister or whatever. There is something for you this season. So let's dive into this, and we've got. I guess what we're going to try and do today is try to find a balance in the approach to ministry. We want to talk about being purposeful and fruitful. We want to talk about reclaiming the biblical practice of balancing our work as ministries. And we're going to break this up today by talking about doing more when we need to be doing more, and doing less when we need to be doing less. And maybe that's not the best way of describing it, but that's kind of the way that we're going to break this up. And we're going to talk about what that means. So when we talk about doing more in ministry, the point that I'm trying to make here, that we're trying to make, is that if we want to have a correct perspective, if we want to have a helpful perspective of ministry, then we don't need to be concerned with doing the bare minimum. We need to remember what the term ministry means. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what that term ministry means. When you find that word in the Bible, Joshua, what is it? What is the Bible really talking about when that term shows up? What needs to come into our minds when we think of that term ministry?
I would say that ministry is, we talked about in Scripture, it is selflessly giving of oneself, whether that be, going on mission, doing mission work and giving yourself, being gone from home, or I think about the deacons, in Acts, where their ministry was to selflessly give to the widows. I think about how the first century church ministered to each other. They went and they'd sold plots of land, and they took the money and they just gave it selflessly to the church. Yeah, I would say ministry is a selfless giving of oneself to God, to the church, to people.
Yeah, so like another word that we can use is service.
Mm-hmm.
So if we think about service or being a servant, what does that look like? Being a servant to Christ looks like, I'm giving my life over to Christ, and that's the picture I think that we can take when we think of Christ as a servant. When Christ served, he gave up himself. He gave of himself to others, and he gave of his time and his resources, and ultimately he served the greatest by going to the cross And through that great act of love and self-denial, that sacrifice was made so that we could be forgiven of our sins. And ultimately, we learned that love, the greatest love, godly love, is learned by that sacrifice of Jesus. 1 John 3:16. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. And so, in that sense, service or a serving love is what ministry is all about. And so, I think that you're right in that it's a selfless, self-giving of yourself. There's a lot of self there, but it's not selfish.
Right.
It's what I'm doing to serve others. And so when we talk about ministering and doing more, we want to have a good view of ministry in the sense that it is a service. It is giving of oneself, and that means going beyond, again, the bare minimum. It's not about it's not about fulfilling a task and checking off the boxes. There's more to it than that. And the way that I like to talk about this, I think, is kind of making a comparison or the analogy of, am I serving the work agreement or am I serving the Lord? Because ministers, sometimes they have a working agreement, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have a contract or something like that.
Like a job
and there's like specific things that they're supposed to do. Right? Other times, again, they don't have something written down. They don't have a working agreement, but they have a particular role. So like a preacher. What's the preacher do? Right? He preaches.
Right.
But he does more than that. He should do more than that. But it's very easy if you get in a role like that to say, well, I just do the preaching and I'm not going to be concerned with anything else. I'm going to, sit in my office and prepare lessons, and that's all I'm going to do. And I'm not going to serve in any other way. If we find ourselves there, then we may need to be doing more. We may need to recognize that, okay, it's not about serving the agreement. It's not about, this is my role and I don't do anything else. There needs to be a challenge in serving the Lord. I have great temptation to find myself in this category. I'm the preacher. We established elders last May. And so the temptation is, I let the elders shepherd, which that is their role, that's their job, but I can go too far in saying, well, they're the ones that need to go visit people. I don't need to do that. I just need to preach. And that's not an attitude that I need to have. I need to be visiting people too. I need to be calling and checking on people, not just them, but because I care about individuals too, and love them and want to serve them. And so that's kind of my spiel about it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that each expectation or each standard, each working agreement, it's different with each congregation that a minister works at. So,
yeah,
some congregations might say, we want the bulk of your time towards lessons, or they might say, we want the bulk of your time going towards outreach or personal evangelism, or someone like a youth minister, an eldership might say, we want you to do more small weekly things with the kids. And some elderships might say, hey, we want you to spend more time planning these big events and put more time into those big things. So what's interesting is that all of these working agreements, doing the bare minimum,
Mm-hmm.
that's different for everybody because everyone's working with a different set of elders or a different congregation. And also with this bare minimum thing, we all have things in ministry that we enjoy, aspects of ministry that we enjoy more than others. As in, you know, I might enjoy going to funeral homes. I might enjoy going to hospitals. That doesn't mean every minister enjoys doing those things. Um, so this whole like serving the work agreement versus serving the Lord, I think it's a constant growing. It's a constant. Uh, I don't want to say doing things that you don't want to do. That's not what I mean
Yeah.
by that.
Yeah.
But growing in those areas, and um, you know, we're going to put a lot of work in the things that we're good at and the things we enjoy doing. So sometimes it takes a little extra effort to put in work in those aspects that we don't enjoy as much or they don't come as naturally to us. Um, so that's my
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
my
and I
spiel.
and I don't want to say like the way that we put this is serving the work agreement versus serving the Lord. They're not necessarily in contrast to one another. They're not in opposition to one another. If you have a work agreement, if you have, an understanding about your role, you know, you should fulfill what's expected. But the point is in Christianity, um, the the life of ministry is never this. You check off the boxes and then you're done. The whole point of the Sermon on the Mount, for instance, is do more. Go another mile. Go further than what you have heard. It's not don't commit adultery. It's don't lust. It's not don't murder. It's don't be angry. It's not fast, but fast in such a way so that it's secret and it's for you and the Lord, and it's not about anybody else. It's going the extra mile is there in the Sermon on the Mount. If one compels you to go 1 mile, you go another. And so there's this concept in Jesus' teachings, not just there, but consistent, that there's a self-denial that takes place, and we're to give of ourselves. He said, about being his disciple, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, pick up his cross, and follow me. And so there's a concept of I'm going to serve the Lord, and that's going to be in any respect that I can. It's giving of myself versus fulfilling the bare minimum. And so I think this is something that we've got to, sometimes we need to recapture. If we're going to reclaim the art of ministry, we need to say, and especially like as we talked about with the whole COVID thing, for some, it has been very easy to be lax and to say, well, because of the restrictions and because of how things have been, and this is the new norm, and I'm not used to visiting folks as much anymore in the hospital because I haven't been permitted to go into the hospital, or we haven't been doing events, we haven't been having, fellowship meals, or we haven't been doing these kinds of things, VBS and other things like that. It may be tempting to say, well, we got along fine without those things. I don't need to do those things. But we recognize that those things are helpful, to go and visit people. And sometimes you have to deal with the restrictions and stuff. You acclimate, you make calls, you write cards, you do other things like that. You think creatively about what you can do, and don't say, well, because I can't do this, or because we haven't been doing this, I don't need to. We still need to give of ourselves. We still need to think about the ways in which we can build up others, build up people in the church, and give opportunities for growth. So if we can have our hand in something that brings growth to the church or brings people to Jesus, then we should do it. We should be involved. We should get to work and give of ourselves in that way, if we have opportunity to do so. And so I think that when it comes to doing more, uh, we need to do more if we recognize that we can be doing more. Right? When we look at our lives and we look at our ministry and say, I'm not being productive with my days, because I do like a certain amount of things, and then like
Hmm.
there's still more that I can be doing. Uh, we need to recognize that and then do more. We need to recognize where the needs are of the congregation, um, and
Yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take it on by yourself either. You can delegate things and talk with people and work with people to help accomplish some needs that the congregation has.
And something, my personal temptation with this is I've had older members tell me that I need to keep a ministry log, just a just a daily log of what I do. Kind of keep my hours personally. And where
Yeah,
I catch myself is it's like Thursday afternoon, and I've reached that 40-hour mark. And the temptation, for me, the temptation is not to say, okay, well, I don't have to do anything anymore. The temptation for me is like, oh, everything I do past this point is, I don't know. I get on my high horse a little bit, and I'm thinking, oh, this is just a gift. This is just overtime that I'm just giving, uh, to the congregation. And it's something that I really struggle with, is my attitude towards giving, in my mind, giving more than the bare minimum, which is, you know, a 40 hour a week or whatever. Um,
yeah,
so for me, it's also, I mean, attitude and how you think about it is a huge aspect to this. Um, the way we look at, is ministry our jobs, or is it just a job, or is it our life? Um, and that's where I have
yeah,
to do better in realizing that it's not just a job. Um, I could go get a job and clock in and clock out and come home and do whatever I want to the rest of the day. But ministry is not a job like that. Uh, so it's, as you know, it's our life. It's
yeah,
entangled with everything that we do. Yeah, attitude is a big part of this for me. It's very essential that I keep my heart right, um, in that it's my whole life instead of just a job.
yeah, yeah. I'm glad you said that about attitude too, because like I think that's probably the most crucial part about this is that we look at this in the right way. And what is that? That's attitude about it. It's the way that we see this. It's our perspective about it, and having a good attitude about what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing is important. Again, it's not about checking off all the things so that I look good. It's not about like, let's see all the things that I can do so I can put this under my belt and say, look at what I've done. Um, but it's about um, who I'm giving myself to and who I am as an individual. I'm a Christian, and it's my goal to serve God. And so I'm going to give of myself and give of my time and give of my life, because I love God and because I love His people, and I want to serve them. And uh, so it takes, sometimes we need to reclaim that. We need to see, once again, that, what I've signed up for is not just a job like a regular job that you clock in and you clock out, but uh, that you have made a decision to, you know, live a life of service. If you are a minister, then you are a servant. If you're a paid minister, you're a paid servant. Like that's what you're doing. Is you're just serving. So that's the attitude is essential when you're talking about this. Now we're going to take a quick break and we're going to talk about the other side of this. Thanks everyone for watching or listening today. We want to remind you to like, share, subscribe, follow, comment, all the things on social media. Because when you do, you're more likely to see our content. And it also helps us spread the word about this podcast and lets us share this with other people. And so Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Rumble, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're on all those. We also want to give a big shout out to the Ministry League. We're a part of the Ministry League Network, and what this is a network of podcasts and other resources that come together for Christian purpose and intent. And they have a great app. The Ministry League app has a lot of wonderful resources for Christians, and it's a great app to have. We also want to encourage you to check out the Bearing Up shop. This is one way that you can support us. We've got all kinds of apparel and mugs and things like that, Bearing Up on it. And there's some other things on there as well that you may be interested in. So go check out the Bearing Up shop. And as always, again, thanks for listening today. And we'll get back into our discussion. All right. So now we've talked about doing more when we need to do more, but now we need to talk about when we need to be doing less. And that may sound like a weird thing, considering the discussion that we've had so far. Really, do we really need to be doing less ever? The question seems to be sometimes, what can we be doing more of? What can we be doing more of? And that's constantly the thing that we're thinking about as ministers, and as the church. What do we need to be doing more of? But I think, again, having an appropriate attitude, an appropriate perspective on ministry is that we know when we need to do less. And the point here is that we don't want to be so spread thin with all the different things that we're doing that nothing is helpful or fruitful. I'm talking about there being particular areas of focus that we allow ourselves to be engaged in, so that the things that we do are fruitful. So for an example here is if you're in a situation where you are the sole minister, you're the preacher, and maybe you're in a congregation with elders, maybe not, but it seems like everything falls to you, and when everything falls to you, sometimes that causes areas to suffer. I can think of occasions where I've had particularly busy weeks as the preacher, and my preaching has suffered that week because I've not allowed for enough time to be focused on preparation, because I've been doing other things. I've just been so busy with other things. So that's caused it to suffer a little bit. And so that's just one example from my own life that I've seen. But I don't know. What's your perspective on this?
Well, I was actually talking to another minister this week about it, and he said something to me was very profound, is that there are three different sections to a day. There's the morning, there's the afternoon, and there's the evening. And he says usually he finds it best if on average the church gets 2 of those 3 aspects of the day. He says usually life becomes very hard when he looks back on his week or his month and the church is getting all 3 aspects all 3 times of every day. He says he notices that that life, that spending time with his kids and spending time with his spouse, those things start to fall. So it's something that I'm going to take away and start using for myself. That you know maybe if you have something in the evening, the afternoon and evening, in the morning, you could maybe spend time with your family. Um, yeah, just on average, try to have that time out for your family or for yourself,
Yeah.
because that's um, so. For instance, like me, in a role that's not a preaching position, an associate or a youth minister or something like that, you know, during the lockdown, there was really nothing we could do, ministry wise, except for phone calls and letters and Zoom meetings. But we're pretty limited in what we can do. And what I've noticed in myself is once the gate opened, I shot out like a racehorse, and uh, moments where my wife Morgan, where I've neglected my relationship with her because I've, like I said, just shot out like a bullet from a gun. And um, something that I've tried to do is balance my time at home and balance my time with Morgan. Um, so and using that 2 out of 3 sections of your day, I think is going to help me a lot, because I've never really thought about it like that.
Yeah. And and I think one of the best things that I've heard about this is, sometimes we need to change our idea about what productivity is. You know, sometimes we think productivity is like the word product is there. And so we think all the things that I can produce, that's productivity. How many lessons can I get done? How many extra things can I do? You know, how many letters can I write? How many articles can I write? How many of this and this and this can I produce? Um, but the problem with viewing productivity in that way is that it does not account for the long run. It doesn't account for uh, an enduring ministry. You can probably maintain that idea of productivity for a short period of time, but ultimately, what happens is you get burned out, um, and burnout is a real thing. It's um, something that I think can very easily plague a ministry because you do the same things over and over again, and you uh, are so busy trying to feed other people that you don't feed yourself. And it's not a good situation when you find the preacher or the ministers or whatever, when you find them in a spiritual rut, or they themselves are spiritually declining, because they may be all about trying to fulfill everybody else's needs and be busy and all of that stuff. Um, but if they themselves deteriorate and do not have spiritual mindedness because they're focused on doing so many different things, then ultimately they're just going to suffer in every area. They're not going to be effective in their preaching, in their visiting. They're not going to show as great as empathy as they could, perhaps because they're there to check off the well, I went, I went and I did my thing like I'm supposed to do, and there becomes an issue with the heart behind everything that's to be done. And so, changing the idea of productivity, or challenging the idea of productivity, um, to include that which um, develops you as a minister and as a person. I think that's important. And the way that you kind of framed it is taking time for yourself and for your family. Right? If things aren't good at home, things aren't going to be good from the pulpit. you know, things are, you know, it's just not going to work. You can't be consistent because your heart honestly is not going to be ready to get up there and speak. If your heart is dwelling on other things, if you're concerned about and it's weighing heavy on your heart, how are you going to speak from the heart at the pulpit? Um, and so you've got to allow time to work, and you have a responsibility to your family as well. So, you need to incorporate that. Um, but you need to make sure as a minister to take time for yourself and your spiritual walk and your spiritual growth. And sometimes that means saying no, to certain things, and scheduling out time where, you could be door knocking, or you could be preparing lessons, or you could be, doing this thing or that thing. There's lots of things that you could check off and say, well, I did this and this. But to schedule out time for your own personal Bible study. One of the best pieces of advice that I've heard is that you take a time. Maybe it's as soon as you come in, and if you have a secretary, I don't have a we don't have a secretary here, but if you do have a secretary, uh, you know, say, hold all my calls for the first hour of the day, because the first hour of the day I'm going to focus on personal study, and I'm going to be engaged in prayer for myself and for my family and for the whole congregation. And, I'm going to focus on that first hour of the day being everything that builds me up to do everything else that I need to do today. And so you end up doing what you need to do, uh, as far as the responsibilities and activities and work that needs to be done, because you've worked on yourself enough to have the right heart to do it all.
Also, sometimes forget the responsibility that in the position that we're in, we are also helping to mold and create disciples of Jesus Christ, and that we should be encouraging other people to minister, and we should be facilitating ministries within the church. And sometimes I get this mindset of, I'm the paid minister, so I'm the one that has to do all of these things. This is my job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I forget that there are other Christians in this congregation that love to minister, and
Yeah.
and sometimes I could be taking, a blessing away from them and just saying, you know what, I'll just do it myself. And I'm not helping to develop those people in their Christian walk if I take that away from them. So I think probably all ministers to an extent, but I need to do a better of delegating and kind of sharing the load with some of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the temptations, I think, is they work a regular job. You say that to yourself. They work a regular job, so they don't have time for this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to do it. And then what you do is you end up having some kind of event in the evening where they're there, but you did it. You're facilitating the event or whatever.
Right. They're just
and they
there.
could have, because they're there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's when we have events, when people can be there, which is outside of working hours. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
So that's just interesting sometimes for I've got to manage it, and I guess I get that, because you have time during the day to think about that stuff, but still there. I mean, there's definitely time that they can be involved in something, and so it's, delegating is important. I think about the apostles in Acts chapter 6, and I think you already mentioned those individuals there. Some people argue whether they're deacons or not.
So
So you think they are deacons?
I would say that they are myself,
Okay.
but that's my opinion.
Well, it doesn't use the words there, but it could be.
We'll
You
just
could
call
look at it that way.
we'll just call them servants and call it that.
Yeah. Well, diakonos, what does it mean? It means ministry.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
just use the word servants, and we'll leave it.
Yeah,
at
there
that.
you go.
Yeah,
But these men are chosen, but the reason why they are chosen is because the apostles said, what does it say there? Verse 2 of Acts chapter 6. The 12 summoned the congregation of the disciples and said, "It is not desirable for us to neglect the word of God in order to serve tables." They were going to neglect their higher task to do a more menial act of service. And so what did they do? They delegated. Said that, this is an important thing, right? It needs to be done. But the apostles could not find themselves, they could not bind themselves to that ministry because they already had other tasks. They had other things that they needed to do. What they spent their time in as apostles, verse 4, we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word. So they had their task. And what ultimately would have happened, do you think, if the apostles said, "Oh, well, we'll do this too, right? We'll serve the tables. We'll make sure that the widows, they get their food." What do you think would have happened?
well, I think about the things that wouldn't have happened. Like, if Peter's a part of that group, I wonder if, the letters that he writes that is in our Bible today, I wonder if those get written, or
Yeah.
The gospel being taken to people that had never heard it. I wonder of all the things that wouldn't happen, and that's usually, when we get so caught up in, we have our hands in everything. Usually, not a lot gets done. If we're so spread out. Yeah.
And it's interesting because two of the men that are selected are men that you probably know from the scriptures, Stephen and Philip, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're chosen for this ministry, and who knows that maybe it was them being chosen for that particular task that led them on to do other acts of ministry. We don't know anything about them before they were chosen to do that. We only know what happened with them after they chose to do that. Philip went on and preached, and Stephen went on and preached. They weren't totally, isolated to, the serving of these widows. That was their task. But they had other ministries that they could be involved in too. So it was about delegating and, putting people in the right place to use the talents that they have. And I think that's probably a good part of this discussion too, is where are our talents? Where are our abilities? If our talent is preaching, and we've chosen to, use that talent and make a life with that, then, that needs to be a focus. And there shouldn't be so many things on your plate that you can't give what you need to that particular task. If that's something that you are, that you have a goal in doing. The apostles, again, they're going to devote themselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word. They could have gotten so spread thin that they were not able to give all that they could give to those areas of ministry. And so, I think that's an important part of this, is recognizing the things that we can do, trying to do those things well, and not being spread so thin that they become ineffective.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Something else that I've been sitting here thinking about is if so. For instance, if we decide that we're going to do everything ourselves, you know, unfortunately, there are very few instances where a minister stays at the same congregation for dozens of years, or for their whole life. It rarely happens that way. So if we put everything on ourselves and we don't let anyone else do anything, and then something happens and we have to go somewhere else, have we left the congregation in a worse spot than when we got there? As in,
Yeah.
if I'm doing all the stuff with the kids and the senior citizens and I'm preaching all the sermons, and, when I leave, have I shared that load with people so that they can pick up the slack and do it themselves? Or, if I kind of left them high and dry, saying, hey, all right, well, you have to do it now. You haven't done it the whole time I've been here, but good luck.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. Um, you know, it, sometimes it's actually uh, hurting the church to take everything on yourself, uh, because it doesn't allow people to use their abilities or grow or be able to do the things that they should be able to do. Um, we had when I was in high school, we had a preacher give a 2 week notice and he left, and like that's kind of a hard thing when a church has to do that because they just leave and then what do you do? And that's when I started like giving lessons pretty frequently. Me and another individual here in Moultrie, we uh, we just took turns doing lessons on the evening. They'd have the men would have somebody come in, a fill-in preacher come in on Sunday morning. Sunday evening we would take turns, and so that's when I learned how to preach. Before going to Freed Hardeman and getting my education there, that's when I started preaching, and that was a good thing. It was a hard thing because he left, and were we really prepared? I think we were in the sense that there was some training that was going on, and we were kind of practicing this every once in a while. But in a situation like that where there is no preparation or there is no like there's not any individuals that have any of that kind of experience. What is happening when they leave? Um, this is kind of a scary thing for some individuals, particularly in the area of youth ministry. Uh,
Hmm.
but there's a book that I read about youth ministry, and it said that your goal, your intent, should be to work yourself out of a job,
Hmm.
because your goal is to develop uh, a community of parents that are focused on helping their children grow in the Lord. And so they're the ones that are giving devotionals and they're hosting people in their home and they're organizing the events and it's just like wow, it's a beautiful picture to have that sort of involvement. Uh, and I think that's a good attitude to have because what happens when the youth minister leaves and they don't have any youth, anyone that's focused on that, you know, it's kind of a sad thing when the youth minister leaves and nobody does anything for the kids. And
Right.
there's,
Yeah.
and they just all, spiritually degrade because all that was put on one person and then they leave and it's like, we got to start over now.
Yeah. I've seen an instance that you're talking about where a youth minister was very outreach focused, getting a lot of community kids, and it built it up to a point to where probably half of the group were just community kids, kids that didn't have roots within the church. And then the youth minister leaves, and I mean, those kids had connections to the youth minister, but not to anyone else within the church. So, unfortunately, those kids fall away because they don't have anything. They don't have anyone grounding them in the church. Thinking about the title of this episode, Reclaiming the Art of Ministry. The way the past 2 years have gone, ministry looked different, and it still looks different in some aspects. So this whole idea of, am I doing too much? Am I doing enough? What's the bare minimum? Am I just trying to keep the bare minimum? I think it's questions that we all, as ministers, have had to ask ourselves the past few months. And I think, if ministry was easy, everybody would be doing it. So I think there is definitely an art, or there are philosophies in how to have a successful ministry, and how to be good servants of the Lord. And I'm thinking about myself. Coming up next month, we're going to CYC in Pigeon Forge for the first time several years. I don't know, since I guess 2019, because 2020, COVID had just started in February, so the word got out, so we didn't go then, and we didn't go last year. So this is the first time that I've had to plan this event since 2019. And to be honest with you, I feel a little rusty in having to, get all the people, all the things that go into planning an event. And to be honest, I feel a little rusty in a lot of aspects of ministry. Trying to reclaim, going back to the title, reclaim the art, or how we go about ministry. So, if you're a minister out there, just realize that there are lots of ministers out there that feel like they don't know what they're doing, and you feel like you got to relearn.
Oh, none of us do. None of us know what we're doing.
Yeah, you got to feel like you got to relearn
Spoiler
everything.
alert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it's beyond the pandemic. Nobody knew what they were doing when COVID happened. Nobody knew what to do. I don't feel like, but it goes much further than that. I mean, none of us know what we're doing anyway, because we're all growing, and I think that's, there's something to be said about that too. Is, if we're going to reclaim the art of ministry, then we need to have some time for reflection. We need to figure out the things we need to be doing more of, the things that we need to delegate, and try to find the right balance. And I do want to make one book recommendation. It's been a long time since I've read it, and I probably need to read it again. This was required reading at Freed Hardeman. There was a book called Balance by Ira North. I don't know if did you read that?
Yeah, we read that.
Okay, yeah. So that's a good one. It's a good one to have, and I've got it around here somewhere. I probably need to read it again. But it's about finding balance in every area of ministry, and if you want to reclaim the art of ministry, that's a good book to read. Well, I think we're gonna close up this episode, and I appreciate everyone for listening. You have any other final thoughts or anything you'd like to tag on here at the end?
No, I'm just excited for this season. If you've never done a podcast, also it is interesting to just sit and talk with headphones on. So,
yeah.
But I'm very excited, and I'm very thankful to be here. So thank you for thinking of me during this and asking me. I do appreciate it.
Yeah,
a lot.
Well, I'm glad you're partnering with me on this, and we'll try to give you guys some updates on Logan too. And of course, we miss him, but I'm glad Josh was on here with me, and I can't remember if I wanted to add anything else here or not. But yeah, I'm excited for the season. Excited for all that we're going to be talking about, and there's a lot of things that we're going to be talking about that I'm really excited to discuss.
Yeah.
So
We have the servant spotlight.
yeah, let's go ahead. We're going to close with a prayer, and do stick around till after the prayer for the servant spotlight. So let's pray. God, we thank you so much for this day and for this time that we've been able to discuss ministry and working for you and serving you and the church and serving others, Lord. And help us to find the right balance so that our hearts are in the right place and they reflect actions that reveal the heart that is focused on you. Help us to delegate. Help us to work with each other so that we can have effective growth in the church and that we can be doing your work in the kingdom in ways that are helpful and are able to help us individually as ministers and help grow other people's hearts and spirits focusing on you. We thank you, Lord, for this podcast, for this work, and ask that you'll bless Joshua and I as we continue in it, and please bless Logan with his new baby boy and take care of that family. We thank you so much for Christ and his sacrifice for us and the wonderful blessings that we have because of him. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. The servant spotlight today goes to a young man who attends this congregation, the Moultrie Church of Christ. His name is Jonathan Jeffrey, and he actually reminds me a lot of you, Joshua. But he's going to school now. I think he's a freshman now in college. But he basically got thrown into giving a lesson, because I had COVID, and then his dad was supposed to cover it, and his dad was feeling really ill, and so I think a couple hours before it was time to start for services, he got thrown into giving a lesson, and he did that, and I was unable to see it, but I know he did a good job, and I do appreciate his servant heart. He's always serving in the church and leading prayer and reading scripture and then jumping up, and taking hold of that opportunity that he had this past week. And so I really appreciate him and appreciate his family so much. And so this week, Jonathan Jeffrey, you've got the heart of a servant. So I appreciate you and appreciate all our men in the church that serve in those capacities, whether here or there, or where you are, Joshua, or wherever the church is working and thriving. We thank you for your servant hearts. And again, we thank our listeners for tuning in today, and we hope that you have a very blessed rest of your week.